Welcome to the Fantastic Story Society, a place for the most unusual stories and storytellers, including your masters of ceremony, Max, Tim, and Scott Markus.
Welcome, everybody, to the Fantastic Story Society. I'm still in love with Scott Markus's creepy...
Everything. My aura.
The introduction is a perfect introduction to Scott Markus. No, it isn't, actually. It was so surprising when you recorded that, and I was like, oh my God, this is so brilliant.
we like to get a little silly sometimes.
Yeah. But no, we have with us today Jay Bachochin. Just give a little bit of a quick background on him, Scott.
Yeah, well, we get into it a bunch in the episode, but yeah, Jay and I, we've known each other for a very long time at this point. It's wild how time keeps flying, but we met back when I was doing the radio show with Dobie Maxwell, and then we collaborated while I was living in LA on a documentary that I directed that he was one of the key figures of. And then he has leapfrogged, and he's making some documentaries of his own now.
Yeah, we watched his most recent one last night, and then we got him on today, and so you'll learn all about those things. But Jay was a great guest, and just full of stories, and that's the whole point of the podcast.
He went from being a ghost story guy to a cryptozoologist, a cryptid hunter looking for Bigfoot in this place that I can only call the Enchanted Woods at this point, because so many weird things happen in this place, kind of beyond Bigfoot sightings. I mean, we're talking about a huge variety of different types of phenomena, and I've witnessed a handful of them myself there in this portion of Wisconsin. It's a wild place.
Yeah. The Kettle Moraine. I used to run some cross-country practices through the Kettle Moraine in high school. I never had any kind of experiences, probably because I was just exhausting trying to run, 12 miles that our coach was forcing us to do. But it really is a beautiful place. And for most of my life, I didn't realize that there were spooky stories that came out of them. But you've had some experiences. Obviously, Jay has made a couple of documentaries, and he's been there. It's like he goes there every day.
Yeah, I think for a long time he was going every single weekend, maybe even a couple times a weekend. He's definitely dedicated to the adventure, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's a good interview. We'll get into it in a second. But what's going on with you, Scott? What's happening?
Well, I'm still in recovery mode, having been at Tim Ellis's bash called the Michigan Paracon.
Yes.
So big thanks to Tim for being, as usual, an amazing host. And I got to meet and re-meet so many great paranormal friends, some future guests that we'll have on. We kind of shored up some conversations there. And just reuniting with people we haven't seen since maybe last time. It's always a big reunion and quite the fun party. And of course, Sunspot performed 2 nights, 4-hour concerts each night.
I can't believe they went that long. That's nuts.
It's and for them, it's nothing. I don't know how they do it. It's quite, I don't know. They're pretty amazing. So if you ever get the chance to see that band, they're really tremendous.
That's cool. I mean, I want to hear more stories about Michigan Paracon, but we'll save that for another drink session or something. But I had my first, I guess you would call it, a Psilocybin therapy session last weekend.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, dude.
I have a friend who is a therapist, and she works with all different age ranges. But she's told me a few months ago that she gets her hands on mushrooms broken down into psilocybin for therapy help. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? That is kind of cool. I watched this cool documentary called How to Change Your Mind. I think it's multiple episodes, like 4 episodes on Netflix. And they covered MDMA and LSD and psilocybin. And then I think it was peyote. But just really cool. My sister was really into it in terms of, I think, she was saying, I really want to do it. And then I'm like, okay. And then suddenly Lisa, my friend, says, oh, I can do that. I was like, oh, okay. So I went into it pretty nervous because, I've heard all these horror stories from guys at parties, like down in mushrooms and they're puking their guts out. And Lisa's like, no, this is not that at all. These are broken down in these really good, yummy tasting gummy cubes. And you eat, as many as you're comfortable with as far as, measuring out the number of grams, and the comfortable range is like 1 to 3 grams. And if you go over 3 grams, you just, you'll have that much stronger of an experience. And so I took like just under 2, I think it was like 1.8 grams. And it was basically like a 3-hour meditation session is really what I experienced. I didn't have any kind of major altered state. I basically laid down for 3 hours and she was in the other room, and she'd come in and check on me 10, 15 minutes, but she wasn't talking me through it. And she walked me through some, just personal growth questions the night before. I want you to be thinking about those things when you're going through this. And I had some nice meditative experiences, nothing as huge as some of my other meditation experiences I've told you about, Scott, that I had years ago.
Yeah.
But relatively close. And so it was kind of like an aided meditation, and it was very positive. Like I didn't come out of it a changed man or anything, but I want to do it again a lot. What I think the biggest thing that I noticed and Lisa told me that like 4 or 5 days after you do this, you'll have little encounters with small bits of euphoria. And I was like, what? How do I even pay attention to that? And she was dead on. For about 4 days after I did it, I just felt excited.
Wow.
Really interesting. It was just a really healthy, I'm excited, positive mental attitude. And so if anybody's having issues with anxiety or depression or anything, I highly, highly suggest looking into psilocybin therapy. I mean, I'm lucky that I don't have major anxiety, depression, but I do have anxiety. And it's enough that it affects me to a point where it's like, all right, I should just try to get over this. I've heard that some of these Schedule I drugs like LSD and MDMA and psilocybin are going to be passed into law as legal for therapy purposes, which is so great. Because these depression drugs like Zoloft, and it's just, they're not helpful. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I should not speak for all the people that are on it, because some people are on it and it works really well for them.
But there's alternatives out there.
It's chemicals. You're using chemicals to combat chemicals in your brain, and psilocybin opens up these pathways that you've kind of locked off in your brain due to, basically stories you've been telling yourself your whole life, and it's built up into anxiety, and it opens those up. And so I want to try to do this every month, because God, if I can get 6 or 7 days a month where I feel euphoria.
Yeah, man, alive.
I'm doing it.
Back in the day when we were both living in LA, I was doing a lot of work with a place called Syn Labs, SYYN. And that's the nerd consortium that did the OK Go Rube Goldberg machine for this Too Shall Pass, that music video that I worked on. And they would hold TED Talk style meetings because these are, again, big brains, whether they're engineers or scientists, or just working in all different fields of some sort of science, usually. One of the symposiums was they talked about a bunch of different things, like a mechanical engineer went up and talked about the future of automated this, that, and the other. And then somebody else came up and they talked about the research that they were doing with psilocybin, specifically with terminally ill patients that, unfortunately for them, death was on the horizon for them, and just the use of this natural drug to find peace. And it's just like better than any other kind of therapy or drug that was out there. And there's like, man, everything's so positive. It's unbelievable. Like way better results than we ever could have imagined is coming out of this. And so you start to think about it, like, well, why do you have to be on death's door to start to make peace with things?
For sure. Yeah. So I mean, there have been so many accounts of people with very serious PTSD and coming out of it like 180 degrees different. And just so positive, the stories that come out. People with serious OCD to the point of their life has been like shut down because of it, and they don't have it anymore. I mean, it isn't as simple as I'm going to eat the mushroom next day, I'm perfect, but you have to work through it. But the mushrooms and the psilocybin allows your brain to open up so you can work through it. It's incredible. So I highly suggest anybody listening who's battling with some form of anxiety, which I would assume about 98% of the population is, consider it. It is not the drug trip that everybody thought it was. You're not popping mushrooms and seeing, Jimi Hendrix on the wall or some shit. It's if you take 10 grams of it or something, then sure, you're going to have a pretty wild experience. But it isn't. No one is going to OD on psilocybin. It's not that kind of drug.
Sure. It's interesting because it reminds me of getting it back to, I don't know if I want to say paranormal, but kind of into that more open, interpretive, supernatural side. And we still need to research the difference between supernatural, paranormal. But there's a documentary that came out a while ago called The God Molecule. This kind of reminds me of a little bit. That's DMT.
Yes, right.
And that one, the premise of this documentary that I saw it on Netflix ages ago. I don't know if it's still there. The idea is that, you take this and then just everything around you is heightened. Everything else, everything around you is, just more vibrant and busy and exciting. So what would happen if you took it and then went into a sensory deprivation chamber? So you don't have any of that outside stimulus. And what it was people had these spiritual journeys that was just within themselves. And again, same type of opening of doors and mind expanding concepts.
Not that I am even close to an expert on this, but I really do think that there is a direct connection between our minds and the so-called paranormal, the experiences you have with ghosts or cryptids or whatever, UFO related, experience, or seeing fae or whatever. I don't want to say positive, but I'm confident that there is a connection there, because the same person could walk into a room and go, nope, not haunted. And somebody else walks in and going, I'm never going in there again. And so it's, what does that mean? It doesn't mean the ghost is like, I'm going to scare him instead of her. That doesn't make sense.
Everything about reality is our interpretations of it and our a willingness to witness it or not. And of course, as we believe that there's a lot beyond what you can see, well, then how do you interpret the stuff that's beyond what you can see?
Yeah. Right. So I just believe that everything is just a huge community of fairies, and they're trying to reach out.
Works for me.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
some of them have slingshots and they fire rocks at the side of Jay's head in the middle of the Kettle Moraine.
There's a good teaser. Stay tuned for the fairy violence.
Fairy violence. They can be a little nasty sometimes.
I've heard legends. Yes.
I mean, obviously, this podcast is about Bigfoot and cryptids and just cool stuff in this beautiful 55,000 acre area of Wisconsin called the Kettle Moraine, because Jay recently released a documentary, and it's a huge project to put a 2-hour documentary together. So we wanted to celebrate that, and did a great job. And so, was there anything you wanted to add before we segue our way in?
Just because you're going to open it up, I wanted to mention, so as Max had already alluded, we talk about fairies a little bit, or even just smaller little people, small creatures, small humanoid creatures. There's a story out of, I think, Central Illinois that a researcher writer named Michael Kleen has written about, which is how I heard about it. I'm sure others have written about it as well. But the nickname of this little cemetery is Ragdoll Cemetery. And here's the creepy story for the interlude here. As the story goes, and of course it's one of these with a couple different versions of the legend, but the idea, this little girl passes away from one of the outbreaks back in the 1800s or early 1900s, and she wanted to be buried with her little doll. And of course, the family gets busy and is focused on everything else about the funeral arrangements and also surviving a pandemic and all this. So she gets buried, but without the doll. And people have since at night seen a little rag doll walking around the cemetery.
I love it.
So I love it. I've got chills a little bit now. Even I've never even been there. But so here's the two options. Either there's an anamorphized actual conscious doll walking around the cemetery, or there's a tiny little human being walking around the cemetery. So either way, it'd be a good place to go camping.
Oh God. Can you imagine camping in any cemetery? Forget it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Ragdoll Cemetery. That's still on my wish list of places to visit.
Well, we've got a long weekend coming ahead here.
There we go.
But if you are in the area and you're looking for something to do, you can camp in the Kettle Moraine. It's actually beautiful. The likelihood of you being, hit in the side of the head by a fairy or Bigfoot coming to say hi, pretty low.
It's not a 0% chance.
It's definitely not a 0, which is enough to maybe say, I'll stay home. But that's all mostly what we're chatting about here with Jay. And so I guess we'll lead you in. This is Jay Bachochin, and we're going to be talking about cryptids. I hope you enjoy.
As we call into order this meeting of the Fantastic Story Society, we are excited to induct a longtime paranormal investigator that I've had the privilege to work with personally. He has led the Wisconsin Paranormal Investigators as I documented his search for paranormal causes in connection with a string of mysterious deaths in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Since then, however, he has shifted gears from ghost hunting to looking for Sasquatch, and also taking the helm as director. His first documentary, Finding Jay, is on Amazon Prime for all to view, and his most recent documentary just came out a week ago, Finding Jay 2, beyond the kettle. Jay Bachochin, welcome, our newest member of the Fantastic Stories Society.
Hey, thanks for letting me in the club, boys.
Hey, our pleasure.
I appreciate
Very
that.
well earned. Very well earned. We just watched your documentary last night, and well done, man. I mean, congrats. We both know, Scott and I, and now obviously you do too, just how much time and effort and thinking and emotions and goes into making a 2-hour feature. I mean, that's well done. You should be proud.
Well, thank you. And I do mean that from the bottom of my heart, because as Scott just mentioned, he was the one who also worked on the documentary, The Hidden Truth documentary about the Crosse Drownings. And we started that, 2010, I believe. And I remember on what a great job he did on it. And it's something that, wow, I wish I could do something like that. But I also knew how much time he spent on doing that.
It's rough, man.
Yeah. Well, Scott, you're an inspiration, man. I didn't realize.
Well, he is an inspiration. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, and I have to thank Jay for being the one to reach out to me, because I was living in LA at the time when this very unique case came up. There's a mysterious series of deaths that are happening, and I was aware of it but didn't know too much about it. And it was Jay that said, what if we took a documentary crew along as we work to see if there's some paranormal influence behind this? And I can't tell you, as a filmmaker, how many times I've had somebody say, hey, this would make a good story, and they're always wrong, except for this time. I'm like, yeah, that's something I haven't seen before.
So is that how you two met? Was that the first time you reached out to Scott, or what was the meeting the first time?
Well, that would just be a couple of years earlier, I think.
Yeah.
And it was, to tie in with one of our most previous episodes as well. It was Dobie Maxwell. Dobie and I hosting the Mothership Connection. And I think Dobie found you guys probably just by searching for Wisconsin ghost hunters or Wisconsin plus paranormal. And you came on to tell some ghost stories on our radio show. And that's when we first met.
So that was a couple of years prior to me reaching out, because you were still living here in the Chicagoland area, right?
Yeah, I was at that point.
Yeah, that's kind of how we met right off the bat.
I'm trying to remember if I've ever even heard your origin story. I knew you for so long as a ghost hunter. And then one day you started to look into Bigfoot, and then you never looked back, it seemed to me. But in general, so obviously you have, whether it was ghosts or cryptids, an interest in looking for the mysteries that are around us. When did that start? Was that as a kid too, or is that a later in life thing?
Yeah. If you want the short version, and this is my Edith Bunker version, I always call it. And I'll date myself because I was watching the creature features back in the 70s, black and white, on WGN.
Sure.
So I was always into, I don't even say paranormal, I say supernatural or
just unknown.
Exactly. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy. I'd be the kid in summer where all the kids would be out in our lot next door playing softball, and I'd be downstairs watching Godzilla versus King Kong, black and white, back then. And I was always that weird kid, right? But I guess I've always had that interest of the weird, if you will. But it wasn't until 1977, 78 in my hometown of Lindenhurst, Illinois. Yeah, it was a Friday night. I remember my mom was picking my older sister up from a school event, and they came in, and my sister was bawling. She was crying. She's like, we're being invaded. We're being invaded. She was hysterical. She was so upset. And my mom came in. She was, hey, you got to check this out. She didn't really come in. She was standing by the door. All my brothers and my sister went back out there, and we saw the most bizarre set of lights that were kind of spinning around. It was really low. It wasn't that high above all the houses. It made no noise. The lights would all of a sudden black out, and it would be across the lake in like a blink. Like it moved that fast. And we watched it for almost 15 minutes, just doing it, blinking out, going further away, closer. And then it finally went away. So at that point, you know what? My grandpa Kay, he was, in the early chapters of MUFON in Chicago. So me and him really connected. He was kind of like Fox Mulder or Kolchak, so that's how he was. So I've always had that interest of the weird, and I did see something strange in the sky. That never went away, right? My interest has always been there. Of course, when Ghostbusters came out in 1984, I really wanted to get a proton pack and bust
Yes.
some ghosts. Because I just thought that was really cool. Now let's move on to the early 2000s when Taps Ghost Hunters came on TV. That was the only one at the time. Now it's saturated, but it was the only one. And I watched that intently, and I was like, wow. And after watching that for a season or two, and I think Ghost Adventurers came out then, and I always thought, well, okay, I mean, is it real? And my wife and I got married in 2006. It was a East Coast trip. We ended up in Salem, went to the witch trial shows and everything that they had, because it was right around Halloween, and we went on an outdoor ghost tour. And I thought that was the coolest thing. In fact, the pictures I took, I think I caught a few orbs, but later on I've now debunked that as probably dust or something that was outside. So we came back. This is my long version, sorry. So and then me and my wife formed the Wisconsin Paranormal Investigators. And our slogan, or really our mission, was to hunt the truth. And to me, what hunting the truth was, going out and discovering it for myself, just not reading about it, watching a documentary about it, because you hear all this, but they're all secondhand stories. Of course, you're watching TV, and to me, TV was, well, is it for entertainment only, or is there some truth to it? So that's what I wanted to do. And actually, Scotty, I think you kind of came in around that time. I developed up a team. I think I have a team of 10 at one point, and we set up a website. And we got, the requests to come and investigate their house or businesses, which was really good. Now, I'm not going to knock any of my old teammates, because a lot of them are friends, and that's great. I think it got to a point after a while that it didn't really seem like hunting the truth anymore. It seemed more like a production, trying to get bigger, trying to get to conferences, and wearing a shirt, that says I'm a paranormal investigator. Pretty much. At least that's kind of how I felt. I felt like the magic of hunting the truth was now kind of getting, I don't even know how to say it. It didn't feel the same anymore. And I don't mean the rush.
Does that mean, Jay, that you didn't discover anything on these house calls that you did?
No, I mean, I've experienced some very odd things. One in Rockton, Illinois, just the 70s, a house built in the 70s. I was down in one of the rooms in the basement, close to 3. I don't want to say right at the witching hour, but it was right around there. And at that point, nothing happened the whole night. Nothing. And one of my investigators was on the outside of the room. And the only thing I had going was my millimeter had kind of a green display that was showing up on the ceiling from where I was sitting. And he asked me, "Are you moving in there?" And I'm like, no. And at this point, I'm not even, what it's like. If you're doing this, you're just sitting in someone's basement and nothing's happening, right? And all of a sudden, something went through me. And when I mean went through me, I was engulfed in ice cold atmosphere that actually raised all the hair on my body. And I mean, my arms, I could feel on my legs, like a cat, how they just kind of puff up.
So that actually is real, because you see that on all the ghost investigation shows. And I'm like, yeah, well, I can't feel it.
Well, no, exactly. And I never did either. But in this case, I could feel it everywhere, neck, everywhere. Here's the odd thing. I still wasn't scared. So, you would know if you were like, oh boy, and all of a sudden everything starts raising. But I was still like, no, there's nothing moving in here. Whoa, it got cold in here. And my hair was just sticking up like the redwood forest, and I trying to document it, and then it went away. So at that point, yes, there was truth that it's real. And it may not happen everywhere, every time, and for every person, and maybe every person's a little bit different. But to me, hunting the truth is actually peeling the onion even more. If we just settled on that a ghost walked through me or a spirit, how do we really know? It's just because of what we've been taught or what we read about. I really want to know. I want to dive deeper into what that could be. Is it a person who's deceased? Is it a parallel universe or world right next to us? We're crossing planes. So what went through me was actually flesh and blood, but we just kind of crossed planes for a second. And again, my theories, and they're way out there, but I think I started getting a little ousted in the ghost world, because I started questioning that, because I'm like, if every one of these things that we're finding is Patrick Swayze or Casper,
Yeah.
then I'm just saying, then really is it paranormal anymore, or is it normal, but we just don't understand what that is? So I kind of got to that burning point a little bit. You set up in these investigations, and you set up so many monitors for DVR, for audio, and you go through hours and hours of evidence that you can't really just watch and pet your dog or eat popcorn.
Yeah, you got
while you're doing. You got to do it, and there's so much to go through. I didn't feel everybody was on board with the reviewing part. It was more the adrenaline,
the adventure,
the adventure, getting out. Let's do this. Let's experience this, and then when we get back, now it's work. And so it kind of got that way at the very end, and I kind of felt, it was just time. I think WPI kind of ran its course, and I just kind of put a hiatus on the team. And then that team started up their own group the next day, which is okay. I mean, then I made the right decision of what I did. And I never really went back to that. Doing research on my own is okay. But then I had Bray Road, just a hop, skip, and a jump drive, right? That's when I started I just call it patrolling. I was just kind of just driving around and legend tripping and seeing if I could bump into this werewolf that was out there.
How many times have you been up and down Bray Road?
Oh, gee, I couldn't even tell you anymore. But when I first started this, people were saying the Bray Road. Now I knew Linda Godfrey. I knew she wrote the book, so I really got to know Linda. I got her book, Beast of Bray Road, and I found it interesting because it was people's reports. I don't want to say I'm doubting. Maybe I'd believe in werewolves more than Bigfoot even. Bigfoot was not on my radar at all. I'd look for the Loch Ness Monster. I'll look for ghosts, Slimer.
Sure.
Anything's
possible.
I'll look for all that too. And I've heard of this Beast of Bray Road, this werewolf. And I'm like, I don't know, let's look for the beast. And we would drive around, not see anything, have too much Mountain Dew, too much beef jerky driving around. And somehow or another, though, we ended up in the Kettle Moraine.
Yeah, first, for anybody listening who doesn't know the Beast of Bray Road, and I'm sure they can pick a lot of this up from context, but can you just give a little bit of background for somebody that's never even heard of the Beast of Bray Road?
So the Beast of Bray Road is reportedly a 7-foot tall bipedal wolf, stands like a man, kind of like your classic werewolf. Linda Godfrey, she actually worked for the Lake Geneva newspaper, and she wasn't even a reporter at the time. I think she was a cartoonist. And they gave her this when somebody did report a werewolf on Bray Road. So she actually coined the name the Beast of Bray Road because there were so many reports and she was taking them. However, that was in the later 80s, early 90s. Digging deeper into that, there are some reports that were even dating back in the 30s or 40s. There's something to that, maybe because of population, more population now, in the 90s that people were using that road. You're going to see it, right? It's the whole classic. If a tree falls in the woods and you're not there to see it,
sure.
Did it make a sound? And I believe that with the population around the Elkhorn area, because I don't think everything is just isolated to Bray Road. I think it actually expands, beyond those borders.
I remember watching a documentary on I don't know if it was specifically about the Beast of Bray. It must have been. And they showed a map, and it was stretching all the way from Whitewater Lake and the huge amount of forests all the way around Whitewater Lake, all the way east, really, I think even to like Bristol, Wisconsin. There were so many red dots of where the sightings were. And I paused the video and I zoomed in. I'm like, wait a minute. And I looked really closely. One of the dots was over my parents' house.
Oh, geez.
Just north of Lake Geneva. And I'm like, oh my God. And there have been a couple times when I've been out in their backyard and there was some kind of animal that made a noise that I'm like, I got to get inside. It was probably a nasty raccoon or what, they have some bobcats,
coyotes.
Coyotes. Yeah, they got plenty of coyotes around. I'm sure it might have been something like that. Because of the nature of growing up in this area and hearing about the Beast of Bray Road since the late 80s, you just immediately think that when you're out in the wilderness somewhere. And that, I think, to me, is a big part of the cryptid story in terms of you're connecting the stories you've heard to some of the things that you might see out in the wilderness, and then suddenly that brain's making that connection. I don't know. You've spent a lot more time in the kettle than I have, and just from your documentary, there were some instances that were just like, okay, yeah, that was pretty weird, man.
Yeah, you're 100% right with that. Is I didn't grow up really outdoors. I did a little bit of deer hunting, and I'm in Wisconsin, right? Everyone has to do a little deer hunting. But anyway, I did a couple of years of that, but I was still never a true outdoorsman. The ones that I've been hunting since I've been 3, and you do get that. I was never like that. So still, I was never really a big go in the woods kind of guy. Stayed away from ticks, poison ivy, just stay at home. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but ever since I started going into the kettle, though, I'm still learning as I go. I'm not an Outback Jack. I'm not Crocodile Dundee. I'm still learning each time I go out there. Just because I heard something, let's say, 2 weeks ago, and I haven't heard it in 9 years, doesn't mean it's brand new and it's a Bigfoot or a cryptid. It just means maybe I never heard that species of owl. Mm-hmm. And that's how I kind of have to chalk it up. Walk that fine line. You're on the fence, not a total skeptic. You're not a believer, and you have to see it to believe it. But when you start piecing all this stuff that's out there, it is, again, I'm at ground zero again. I'm starting off brand new. Like I said, I never believed in Bigfoot until, we did a legend trip off Bray Road, ended up in the Kettle Moraine in October 2013, and it was 4 of us out there. We got brave. We parked off the side of the road, saw a trail, started walking it, and it was a beautiful night. That's when we captured. I actually had a real crappy digital IR camera. I remember being out there, and Ray, one of the guys that we were out there with, he goes, "Hey, did you hear that? It sounded like a cross between a primate, a human, making this sound, mind you." And I'm like, I've never heard this before. It reminded me of an old Creature from the Black Lagoon, Amazon, the type of monkeys that are out there. And it was really weird. I only captured 1 clip out of the 4 I heard, but that's what catapulted me. That's what triggered me of saying, well, I wonder if there is something to this dogman or Bigfoot out here.
One of the many things that I noticed in the documentary, I had never heard of the Sierra sounds. And that's kind of it sounds like what you're mentioning. And if anybody has never listened to the Sierra sounds, I'm sure you can go online and listen to them. It's some recordings from the early 70s that these hunters recorded out in the woods, I think somewhere in Northwest. But crazy. Like, they were so ridiculous. My immediate reaction was, come on.
That's everybody's. That is
the more you listen to it, you're like, okay, yeah, if a human being's making that noise, they're really good at it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, if you watch that, I only touched on a little bit of Ron Moorhead, who was one of the hunters that captured. There was a few other hunters that did, but he was the one that got them produced. But they were studied well before they were produced. It's not like, look what I got. It's a Bigfoot and everyone's going to believe it. No, there is something to that where they've seen them up there, 8 miles up in the mountains up there. You're 100% right. When you listen to it, it sounds like Billy Madison, his gibberish, that's what I was thinking of them.
Yeah.
Once you talk to Ron, though, once you get to start to talk to people and dive into their personalities, what they stand for, you start to kind of put things together. You saw my second documentary that you guys watched, but there was this, we caught a howl out there. That was not a wolf howl, canine or a cat. And I know exactly when I'm out there where the closest town could be, however many miles away or whatever. And this was close to like 10:30 at night. And this thing sounded like a siren. It's big to me, even if it's hard to hear, and if you want to put it on headphones, it was extraordinary to hear.
Well, I remember I've had the privilege that you've taken me out twice to go through the kettle, and as a fan of scary movies, I think so much of it starts with setting. And so let's just paint the picture. What is the kettle that we're alluding to so much?
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, this is really good. You look at the state of Wisconsin, you have the Kettle Moraine, which is about 55,000 acres that actually stretch about 100 miles through the state of Wisconsin. It is from the Ice Age, let's say. Well, we're going to go back there where the glaciers were retreating, which created the Great Lakes, left big divots kind of scraping into the ground, deep impressions, that would be your kettle. A moraine is more of a meadow. So right here, you've kind of got a woods meadow setup, which has lakes, ponds, deep kettles, places that it's just so overgrown. My wife, for example, she still kind of rolls her eyes with Bigfoot, which I completely understand because, you have to be out there. She doesn't do this with me. And she just goes, well, maybe it does exist, but in Wisconsin. And then I said, you haven't been to the kettle though.
It is a huge space.
Yeah, right, Scott. We hiked a Pinhead compared to what it is. So could something live in there that's that big? Absolutely. You've got plenty of food, with deer, the wildlife. You've got your water. So it's a perfect habitat that could actually support something. I don't want to say on the lamb, but you know what I mean? Something that's just kind of out there.
If it wanted to not be found, it would be a good place.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So it is. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time.
and I got to say that in addition to the fact that, you went into the kettle, you had your first experience, which kind of, got you hooked a little bit and curious, what is this? The kettle itself seems like such a mystical space. And I think, in my opinion, it might be a place that John Keel would call a window area because there's so much different phenomena. And I know when you were at the very beginning of this journey that you're on, one of the things you told me about was that you've experienced missing time there. And that's what really perked me up. That like, whoa, this isn't just looking for Bigfoot. There's other types of like sci-fi phenomena going on. And of course, then you brought me there. And I think the first time it was just you and I there. And it was maybe the most frightening investigation I'd ever been on. And that's coming from a guy who's been doing this since the 90s.
Part Scott of it can be a little bit of a baby sometimes, but
hey, come on, what he was in Ambush Alley, and what did you see? Those two red eyes?
Yeah, that's what we each saw red eyes separately, but in the same area. And I didn't convey it to you when I saw them initially because I kind of was doubting myself. Like, I didn't really see that. So I didn't say anything. And then about 5 seconds later, or 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, I think I just saw eyes. And I like point to where you saw the eyes. And you pointed to right where I thought I saw them. Yeah. So that was spooky.
Yeah.
Very creepy.
But yeah, and that was an eye-opening thing to me too. Not only red eyes, but just eye-opening to, to see how we have our own biases and we'll interpret things different ways. I could totally understand it if somebody said there was a demon standing there. Like, yeah, it was freaky, red eyes. Me as the ghost guy would look for something along those lines. You as a Sasquatch person or a cryptid person, I should say, it would be connecting it to Bigfoot. So it's really open to the interpretation of the witness.
You said it perfectly. And I back then did put Bigfoot or cryptids in its own box, ghost in its own box, because I just left that field, right? UFOs in their box.
Sure.
And honestly, I have consolidated all the boxes into one box. I don't go out there just looking for a flesh and blood primate because there's all these other paranormal activity type things occurring around there all the time, from the orbs of light or the twinkles of light that shouldn't be there. They are there. So, you start using this, then you have the Bigfoot activity, which is, I call Bigfoot behavior. If like you guys really probably don't follow like I do, these town hall meetings of people telling their encounters. Now you could put your BS meter on and say, BS, that sounds, you could do that. When you start hearing enough of them for over the years, you kind of start profiling what some behavior would be like if you were out in the kettle and some of this stuff has happened. So therefore, okay, so it could be Bigfoot related. But just like in my second documentary you guys watched last night, I caught something on thermal. We figured out it's bigger than an animal or a person on the distance in the woods. And when it ducked away from the tree, like playing peekaboo, that's when we saw this orb of light come from that area. Okay, so you could say coincidence, right? As soon as it ducked away and hid and we didn't see it again, we see this orb of light right in front of us. But as soon as the light went to where we couldn't see it again, we heard loud breaking through the trees. Yeah. And honestly, at this point, I'm going, wait, the weird Jay's brain is going, wait a minute. Did I just see something solid? It turned into energy, avoided us, right? Got away from us, and then became solid again. And that's where we heard the breaking. It was all so weird that it was like the trifecta of high strangeness at that point. You were talking about Ron Moorhead. He's got a book out called The Quantum Bigfoot. It's a great read. It's not saying that Bigfoot is a ghost or a spirit, but it's not also saying that it's just a flesh and blood primate. It's got a lot of strangeness in there. You could bring in extraterrestrials into this. You could bring in ghosts or spirits or alternate dimensions, portals. I mean, there's so much that you could throw there, but yeah, that's all there in the kettle.
I love all the theories, and the more wild you can get, the more I'm into it, to be quite honest with you. I like the idea of interdimensional bleed through, that, you know, whether it's on purpose or not, that there's something that's where I think I am sometimes, that's why they're there sometimes and still making physical contact and then gone other times. Oh, and this also, I don't think I've ever thought about it like this until seeing your documentary, comparing it to my background with ghost stories and the paranormal. People would say, like, well, what is a ghost? Like, well, there's not one definition. You know, there's all types of there's a number of different phenomena, and there's different theories behind them. You can't try to make every story fit the same definition, because there's a lot of different things that we think are going on. And I've never thought about it in the Sasquatch sense too, that maybe right now, a whole bunch of stuff. If it happens in the woods, we call it Bigfoot. But maybe there are multiple different things going on. But for right now, it's all just being kind of, you know, dumbly categorized into the same, as you say, box.
Yeah, you were talking about probably about those trees that were wilted, but they were still living. Do you remember on the trail? They like bent into
they were curved over. That was weird.
Okay, and it is weird, but because it's the woods, does it make it Bigfoot? However, since we don't know what a Bigfoot is, and honestly, okay, again, this is where my mind goes. You guys all remember the Terminator, the first one or two, when they in the beginning, when the Terminators arrive into that bubble, like that time warp thing. Mm-hmm. It's really weird that those two trees were wilted like that, but still living, and nothing else around that surrounding area was really touched, almost as if something came in and left.
It kind of made me think of crop circles a little bit.
Exactly. I mean, look how the crop circles are laid down and kind of,
and they're still growing.
And they're still growing. Exactly. But we're not out there to say what it is. But getting back to what you were saying about just because it happens in the woods, it's a Bigfoot, right? Just like in a house or Waverly or Ohio State Reformatory, does it just mean that it is a deceased spirit still living just in the confines of the prison or, you know, the insane asylum? You know what I mean? Could there be other windows of energy there that's not related to death? I mean, I don't know, but that's where I like to go.
I think what's fun about all of this, and I think why we do this, is because, you know, at least the three of us, I think I can speak for all three of us here, is that we're all writers and storytellers from a natural standpoint. We love stories, but we hate not being able to finish them. Like, we don't have an end to any of these stories. And so we are constantly trying to figure out, well, how did the story end? And it's funny because I just had that realization a couple days ago. And then I watched the documentary last night, and I'm like, yeah, it's kind of the same deal. Like, it's not like we're angry we can't finish the story. We enjoy the process of trying to figure it out. Otherwise, why would we be doing this? But it goes back to like 2010 to 2012. I got really big into conspiracy theories, and not, you know, from the political side of things like we do today, which has completely ruined conspiracy theories for me. But the wild, you know, UFOs and 2012 Mayan calendar, all that stuff. As the years progressed, I think I got tired of not being able to have the answer anymore. And so I was just like, all right, whatever. I guess that I'll always have this sense of I don't know. And maybe as I've gotten older, I've wanted more control. So I've gotten a little tired of not being able to answer it. But there's always that thing that's pulling us into trying to, what's the answer? You know, and I feel, for me, for whatever reason, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, cryptids in general, is something that I don't know how I feel like I could answer the ghost question better than I could the Sasquatch question. That seems ridiculous, especially since Bigfoot could actually be just some other form of a primate, which from science, it makes more sense. But anyway, I think the point I'm trying to get to is we love telling stories on this podcast. Is that a feeling that you have that you're never going to answer, but you want to try to figure it out?
Yeah. Do you know, you just talking about conspiracy theorists, honestly, what it really comes down to for me, this is for me, I honestly don't believe there is one truth anymore. People usually are bickering about whatever side they're on, or Packers, Bears, or in the Bigfoot world, flesh and blood, paranormal, Bigfoot. At least this is what I do, is I need to go out and find my truth of what I saw, what makes sense to me. And it's not going to make sense to everybody. And I really think that's how it is out in this field. And I mean generally, whether it's ghost or Bigfoot or ufology, you're always going to get that. People ask me all the time, well, do you go anywhere else? And you go squatching. And I said, well, I don't call it squatching. I call it hiking. I hike, I observe. You were just saying, Max, that, you can never finish the story because we really don't know. But for me, it's the journey, and it's the journey of meeting like-minded people like you guys, where you're like, hey, let's go hiking, right? What could happen? What couldn't happen? Either or. It's the journey of getting out there. It's the journey of laughing. You know what I mean? And just totally. And bonding that way as friends. So that's what keeps me going. Because Scott said in the beginning that, once I went, started looking for Bigfoot, I never looked back. And I think I find this field or this adventure, this lifelong adventure, is everything to me. Whether I know what a Bigfoot is at the end of the day or the end of my life, hey, it was a fun ride, So that's how I look at it.
Quick, just basic question, because you've been going to the Kettle Moraine for a while now, and you've been going back over and over and over again. Is that typically what Bigfoot? What's the right phrase? Even Bigfoot hunters, investigators. Squatchers. Is that usually what happens? Because I know, the ghost hunters are generally going all over the place, trying to go to as many different locations as possible.
Correct.
Do you tend to investigate the same place?
Same place, because I don't have the answers. I don't have the story. I can't finish the story. That's kind of how it was when I was ghost hunting with the team. If you really found evidence, why not go back there again next week and the week after and the week after, and try to be able to put all the data together that you've captured to try to answer it, instead of coming to a conclusion that was the person who lived here and died. We've got it. Let's move on and get something bigger like that. I'm not out in the woods to actually try to capture Bigfoot on video or a picture and be that infamous or famous person who's going to get rich off this. You know what? Everybody has their minds made up, and no matter what you see, even if you guys knew me and you were there and I took pictures of it or video and I post it or sell it to a TV station, it's all fake. Nobody's going to believe it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So my motive is different for going out into the Kettle. I am going out there because I have a relationship with the woods. I know the trails. I know the surroundings. I know what I've heard, the different coyotes that seem to circle me, not really close, but
sure.
Where you hear these different things, and I have that relationship with the woods. To go anywhere else to try to prove it, that's not my main goal. My main goal is to make contact, and that would be to learn the end of the story so I can finish the story, like Max said, just to be able to say, hey guys, this is what Daryl's like. Yeah, his name's Daryl, and he likes Folgers coffee, and we drink coffee. And they've been here forever, since they were the first humans here. And I could tell you guys that, and it would still be secondhand, even though you know me, and it would still be hard to swallow. So it's kind of like, all right, I'm going to show a picture or video, at least to my wife, to say, look, your husband's not crazy. See, that's and really that's kind of my goal. It's a beckoning. It's not so much a burning passion. It's, I want to be out in the woods. I don't know what it is. I can't get enough of it. That's why I enjoy doing it. And I don't really go anywhere else. I have 5 sections in a 10-mile radius out there, and I visit them all, loving every minute of it.
When did the decision come up to start putting together? I mean, as an investigator, you're gathering footage all the time anyway. When did you start to think that maybe a documentary is the next step on your path?
After seeing this awesome documentary called The Hidden Truth by a guy named Scott Markus. No, actually, that I love the way you put that together. But when I first started doing the hiking thing and, researching more Bigfoot, and I take pictures and video of everything. And I also carry audio device on me, which records from the time I get out of the vehicle till the time I'm back. So my whole life's recorded right now on 2 5-terabyte hard drives, external hard drives. I do record this just for the fact that, because I'm hunting the truth, I want to know this. I want to be able to go back and review it. And I think it was 2015, somebody asked me to go to one of these events. And I'm like, I have nothing to sell. I've got, Hunt the Truth bumper stickers that nobody uses anymore from my ghost days, or a few shirts. I'm like, why don't I just put down a few of my top pieces of evidence onto a DVD, sell them for $5 or just something to sell instead of just sitting there having keychains or something. And I started doing that. That was actually my main intention. It was not a documentary. As I started putting a little bit more and more together, I immediately recognized that this is going to be bigger than what I thought it was. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just tell my story of when I first started to do this? Because I wasn't into Bigfoot. You know, I would laugh at people who said Bigfoot back in 2013 before this happened. Yeah. I kind of started writing out my treatments, you know, for my film, and kind of just put it down to what I wanted to put in there. Everybody kept saying, oh, well, hey, that's a great idea, Jay. Keep it under 60 minutes. You could enter it into indie films. And I'm like, yeah, all right, well, I'll try. Well, not my final cut, but the pre-cut for my first documentary was actually almost 3 hours and 10 minutes. And I knew.
Would you have notes for that, Max, as the consultant?
Yeah, I might just say you got to cut it in half, man.
Well, you know, and that's just it. And somebody did recommend that. Now I recut it down and I got it down to 2 hours, and somebody still said, yeah, but you know what, Jay, you're going to have to break this into 2. Now I'm in a dilemma because of the way I made the first one flow. I couldn't just end it at 60 minutes. I couldn't do it. It would make no sense. Therefore, I'd be the Ed Wood of documentaries. And, you know, I said, you know what, but I'm not out about creating documentaries and putting them out and getting fame and fortune and being recognized and having, you know, millions of people liking me on social media. I wasn't about that. I wanted to tell the truth, and I wanted to tell my story. So at 2 hours, I'm like, that's it. That's my mark in the world. I'm done. I drop the mic. Just meaning, this is my story. I'm not doing another one because that was painful to go through. And I was done with that first documentary, but it all started out to be like a little 20-minute DVD that I could sell at conferences.
Interesting.
It just grew into what it is today.
And then, well, obviously something sparked that, oh gosh, I guess I am doing part 2.
Oh yeah. My wife was pleased about that. You know, I spend a lot of time here in front of the computer with headphones on. And when I start to commit to something like this, then you really have to follow through, or you're just that guy who likes to talk big. You know, I'm going to do a part 2, and then it never happens. So I had my release date. I had that all down. COVID this year didn't help. Kind of got that after Christmas, and in January, I got it so bad that it was making me delusional. And I'm like, you know what? Bigfoot doesn't exist. Ghosts don't exist. This is the stupidest thing I'm ever doing. It really.
So what are the side effects of COVID? Was skepticism.
Skepticism. You know, it was because you're feeling so down and everything's so great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it sucked. But I got back on the horse, and I had to move my release date into August of this year. You know, coming up with the second one wasn't a matter of saying, okay, Jay, repeat what you just did in the first. The first one, you kind of introduced yourself, how you were, how you ended up, and everything in between. Now what am I supposed to do? I'm not going to just make a movie to just make a movie, right? I already made my mark. That's how I felt. Drop the mic. I'm done. The one thing that had to have been told were these lights that are out in the woods.
I'm really glad that you focused on that, because that was one of the things that the first time you brought me out, it resonated so much with me. And I'm glad you guys mentioned the similarity to Will of the Wisp, because that's the first thing I thought when I was seeing these with my eyes with you. Just to give a little bit of my story here, I kept seeing these little things, and they were like a soft gray color. They weren't bright. They weren't like, I've seen a, quote unquote ghost light, which tends to be like a flashlight bright, and it definitely was not lightning bugs. It wasn't green in color or anything like that, but they were larger than a lightning bug. This like again, soft gray color, and I would see them and I would kind of wonder, am I seeing something out of the corner of my eye? Is it an optical illusion of some sort? And then at one point I was talking to you, Jay, and we're in the darkness there in the middle of the kettle. And as I'm looking at you, one appears behind you and floats behind your head. So I see it disappear as it goes behind you and then reappear on the other side. Like, nope, there's no optical illusion there. I'm looking directly at it this time.
Right.
Well, the first thing I thought when I, you mentioned that in your documentary, and I was like, fairies. And I've always kind of had this little thought of, if there's anywhere a fairy's going to live, it's in the Kettle Moraine.
You know what, though?
Everybody's like, oh boy.
No. That's what I'm saying. Before anybody starts laughing, This is funny because a podcast I did 2 weeks ago, I was talking about, believe it or not, I have reported cases of little people, and we're talking 12-inch high or shorter.
So where?
People in the kettle.
I love it. I'm going tomorrow.
Oh, I'm telling you, I don't know what I'd be freaked out more with, seeing a 9-foot, tall, hairy beast, where you look down and you're Gulliver, and there's a bunch of them just looking at you.
I don't know. I think I'd be like, hey, look at you. And then
I don't know. I would look down and they'd be.
But that's the thing. I mean, culturally, Americans, we don't like, the Fae isn't part of our history here locally so much, but other parts of the world, it is absolutely a much more accepted concept than it is here. So yeah, a lot of other cultures wouldn't laugh the way, we're worried that somebody might hear.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, like I said, I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they said, Jay, I've already got your topic for finding J3, little people. I'm like, oh my God.
I will join you on that hike. I would absolutely. I don't know if you know this, Jay, but I wrote a fiction young adult fantasy about fairies. And so I'm into the whole fairy world. I've been trying to finish the second book for however many years now, but yeah, I love them.
Well, and the thing is, and that's awesome, but are we going to put these lights, the wisp fairies, in its own box again, away from Bigfoot, away from ETs, away from ghosts? And the thing is, we don't know, and nobody knows. We all have opinions, and we might all have our own little truths that we're going to disagree with each other because we're right, no, you're right type of thing, but we don't know. And that's the beauty about the kettle, is it does hold, I hate to use the word high strangeness because that makes it sound so, I don't want to say sinister or paranormal. I mean, what if all this stuff is just not paranormal, but supernatural, just like walking into a place where I've lost time, and it's not just me.
I'd love to know your opinion on this, and Scott, your opinion on this, and maybe it's the same, but what is the difference between supernatural and paranormal?
In my opinion, paranormal is really associated with, I think, more with the ghosts, the things that can't be repeated in science, the paranormal part of it.
Okay.
And anyway, that's the way I'm going to perceive it. But the supernatural is that what is going on is 100% natural on planet Earth, 100% natural. It's just a natural that we don't understand. And that's where you'd get, it's just an elevated natural part of nature that we don't understand, supernatural. So, and then I bring that away from the paranormal, but again, that's me. Everyone's going to have their own definition, but it's the way I perceive it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
To me, at first, I would think I was putting them both in the same, that they are the same thing. And as you've heard me say many times on this, I think most of the paranormal is part of science that we just haven't studied and understood yet, but it can be found. As I started to kind of think about that more, I thought, well, maybe supernatural, then how I would differentiate it. Like paranormal is, I mean, it's all mysterious, of course, but maybe the supernatural has more of a spiritual element than the other. But I've never really considered it breaking down those two words separately. So I'm kind of curious myself to look at the etymology of them. Like, where do these words exactly originate from?
It's interesting that you said that the supernatural might have more of a spiritual side, because I was always thinking paranormal was a little bit more of the spiritual side, and the supernatural. Like, I think of it all, everything that we experience that we can't explain is just not everything, but most things is just like, you're basically what you're saying, Jay. Everything is natural, and yet there are super versions of it that we don't know from a science basis how to explain it.
So it's just like the silverback gorilla in the early 1900s.
Sure.
You're right. That didn't exist. And now it does, which is now natural from nature. We just know it. Back then, though, I don't know if they would have labeled it paranormal, seeing a big beast-like type thing out in the woods, being the gorilla, which became a supernatural. So, Max, like you were saying, I think it's just a matter of us pinpointing, understanding what those are before we can categorize them, like you were saying, spiritual.
Well, I mean, the fact that quantum physicists have literally mathematically proven that there are other dimensions beyond just the three that we can perceive.
Right.
That to me says, okay, well, that's natural. It's not even supernatural. We're able to show it through obvious, just, theoretical equations. But we as human beings from a physical nature are unable to experience those other levels of dimension. So that's how I then go to ghost hunting, Bigfoot, fairies, etc. But then I stopped there. I'm like, well, okay, I don't know what the bridge is, like you can't explain any of it.
I always say you just put them in one big kettle pot and stir it. You see a Bigfoot and an alien, a ghost, a fairy.
And the Kettle Moraine may very well be doing that.
and it very well could be. And I don't have those answers. I wish everybody who is listening to my voice right now would say, this guy, Jay, knows what he's talking about. He has the answers. I don't. That's the best answer you can give anybody, especially in this field. And that's how come I really don't go arguing with anybody with this, because I don't know. It could be 100% flesh and blood primate, or it could be a ET dropped off in their drones and their watchers, keeping an eye on humanity to make sure we don't destroy ourselves. What if the parallel universes we collide within our planes of existence, and there you go, you've got your people, your ghost, your spirit, everything. Like you were saying earlier, Max, I can't finish the story, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think this episode we might be our last one, Scott, because we just covered everything.
and then didn't have an ending,
Right? Yeah, there you go.
Okay, bye.
No, you don't even say bye. It just cuts off.
Right.
There's like nothing there.
To a commercial from stamps.com. Yeah. Before we end off with a story of your own choosing, I bet just from the production standpoint, again, we always talk about that. As long as you're creating, you are improving, because you're practicing a craft and you're going to inherently get better at it. Now you're a second documentary in and released. And I do want to talk a little bit about the kind of the behind the scenes, because most of our listeners are storytellers themselves. They are creators, whether it's screenwriting or filmmaking. What lesson do you think you learned in the first one that you applied to the second one?
Well, I think the first one was really me tiptoeing on the subject when I really should have. The story was about myself and my journey, and I really was very careful on how I would word things or show things or narrate things that would move the documentary along, which kind of left the ending open. I actually asked a question and answered it with a question, and I didn't answer it. And I always thought, I'm ingenious. I'm an artist. I did this. Look at me go. But you know what? At the end of the day, I really wish I would have put a little bit more of me that I've done in my second documentary, which you'll see a lot more of my opinions, my theories, or how I break things down.
Sure.
And it's something that I look back at the first. And believe me, when I do my own work, and you see your films a million times because you work on them or you watch them with somebody, I'm like, oh God, that first one's so cringeworthy. I gotta do something. I gotta do something different. And people but they love the first one. And I didn't want to get into a TV production type second documentary. I still need to have that flavor of the treatment of Jay, investigating out there. The long answer is I wish I would have had more of the real me in the first documentary. So I learned from that and definitely applied it to the second film.
And then just curiously, from the business standpoint, the not fun side of things, things have changed within the last year or two, because I know your first documentary is on Amazon Prime, and this one is not. And could you just talk a little bit about that from the filmmaker standpoint? Because I think Amazon made it a lot more difficult for independent filmmakers, right?
Yeah, they did. In February of 2021, they kind of, they put their hands up, and I think they were being a little bit more selective of what they were going to do, because people used to upload, their own little short documentaries or whatnot and just use it as Prime, where you don't have to rent or buy it. It's just going to be free. And there was tons and tons of that.
Kind of became YouTube.
Yes.
Or the fear was, at least.
Right. And that's what Prime did. They said, all right, we're done with you just being able to go on Prime and watch other people's work. Okay, we're going to throw that out the door. You could upload for a buy or rent, but it's still incredibly hard. And I'm not leaving Prime off the table for Beyond the Kettle, Finding J2. I've been working with them, and I get bounces back, and it's not positive. Then it is positive. It's a pain. So it's like the next best place is I'm going to go to Vimeo which actually both of my films are both on Vimeo as well. You can find my first film on Amazon Prime and my two films, the first and second, on Vimeo right now. But yeah, the business side of that, I don't want to say it was harder than creating it, but I'm telling you, all the marketing after, and where do you go? And you have Facebook that really only, you post something and it only goes about 8% of whoever you're following.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's just word of mouth. And then it's, podcast and exposure like that. That's the way to get it out there. That's the hard part of it. But yeah, Prime. Yeah, I'm hoping I'm not going to rip Prime, because if it all of a sudden turns around, then I'm going to look like a jerk. I don't want to look like a jerk.
Well, it is just important to know that, I mean, all of these things are always changing. Max, he co-hosts a show right now through the ISA Insider News, a great weekly show. And it seems like every week it's like, okay, what is the latest upheaval? Because something massive just shifted again. It seems to be constantly happening. So it's good as creators to be aware.
Yeah, it's true. It in a weird way, I experienced it with the self-publishing world. It's a lot harder to self-publish a book now. It's not as difficult as the Amazon Prime process, but it's just the market. If you didn't get in on the beginning of it, then now it's just so difficult to even get noticed.
100%, whether it's a book or a documentary, it's right. We're artists. We want to put our stuff out for people to see. Now, it'd be great to be compensated. Am I going to get rich off this? No. Hey, I'll be honest. It feels nice to be recognized, but it doesn't have to be how good your film was or wasn't. It's more the artist part of it, to where I want to show you what my truth is. That's the exciting part to do it, but I don't want to go through this again for a while. Somebody asked me just the other day, they actually asked, oh, well, we watched it, Jay. It was really good. I'm like, all right, thanks. I mean, it's biased, right? Because he's a friend. Is he going to say it's bad or whatever? But anyway, he said, it's good. When is part 3 coming out? Katie looked at me with darts in her eyes. So, and that was it. I got done with it to relax again until
the calling
until the calling of the little people come up and lift me out in the kettle and say, make a movie about us.
Yes. The underbrush of the kettle. I like it.
Right. Oh, there you go. Right.
All right. So, here at the Fantastic Story Society, since we have storytellers on, we'd like to put the spotlight on you, give you the floor. If there is a story that comes to mind as your favorite story to tell about your adventures in the kettle, and I got to tell you, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it yet, but one of the engaging stories and pieces of video was you having rocks thrown at you from some unseen place. That was back when you were getting started. And I'm like, yeah, I want to go. I want to have rocks thrown at me too. But, so you've captured some wild things. What stands out to you as one of your maybe pinnacle moments, whether scariest or most engaging or enticing?
My most enticing, I will tell you here in a second, but I'm going to tell you, you don't want rocks thrown at you, because the week before I was with Linda Godfrey.
Yes.
And that's when I shook the tree like a silverback gorilla, and I was super aggressive and I'm shaking it and just roaring and everything. And I got beamed on the side of the head with something that had dead accuracy across the meadow I was at. It was not something that fell out of the tree like Gilligan's Island. It hit me on the left side of my head, where I had a bump. It still hurt for 4 hours, and I got lost after dropping Linda off. Even though I've been there 100 times, I couldn't remember. So I don't know if
that's
it was
crazy
concussion. Exactly. So a week later, what I captured, Scott, you could see that when Sanjay's standing there, he's like, oh, here comes another one. And you see the camera turn, and I'm like, nope, because I didn't want to get hit again, because getting hit in the head with a rock hurts, right? So I didn't know what the hell was throwing it at me. Was it a Bigfoot? Their behavior is known to throw rocks through the woods. And you would say, okay, well, a person can do that. Okay, well, let me just back up and say, if you're off the path and you're in the kettle with that terrain and you're so far back, I don't care how accurate you are, most likely you're going to hit a branch, a bush, a tree. And whatever these things were coming from, they were coming from a distance through the trees. And they were always landing by mine and Sanjay's feet. I'm gonna throw this out accuracy,
because I just got a visual in my head of a 10-inch tall fairy with a slingshot.
There we go.
There's a lot of weirdness that seems to happen in that part of the kettle. Which, if we ever go out, I will take you to that area where we've heard that the weird hollow. I don't want to say bongo, but like that hollow banging.
Yeah.
Morse
Yes.
code.
Yes. That
Yeah,
was engaging.
Yeah, and there was a lot of weirdness that's happening in that area. And that's where I've had rocks thrown out of me. That's where I found my first set of huge footprints, in the snow. That this is where we saw the lights. The one where it was with me, Tobias, Emily, and Adam, all on that same path over that same dome of Kettle. So there is something there. And I can't tell you what that is, but that's not my engaging story. So sorry for rattling on.
No, that's good. Good.
One of them is not even in my documentary because I have no audio or no video to prove it. This is just what happened. My buddy Chris and I, we went out on a June night where it just got done raining. So it wasn't raining, but all the moisture and the raindrops are falling off the rain falls off the leaves. So you're out there and all you hear is 360 degrees around you. So we're walking. It's pretty dark. I could probably see, maybe a foot in front of me. And then it gets really dark, the canopies of trees and everything. And it's a nice wide path, probably 12-foot, 14-foot wide path. And I'm walking in the center. Chris goes, "Hey, do you mind?" He brought his billy club. He goes, "Can I do a few knocks?" Yeah, go ahead. He asked because I don't bang on trees or I don't yell. So he went over to the side of the kettle. We're over this one was a deep kettle, 300-foot kettle. And he walks over and he whaps the tree. Now it's dark. I can't see what he's doing. That's how dark it is. Wham, wham. And so normally when you do that, you're quiet. You want to listen for a reply. That's generally how it's done. So he's standing there, I guess. I couldn't really see him. And I'm standing in front of him. And I close my eyes. I don't know why, to concentrate listening for a call back because it was already dark. But I closed my eyes. And just as I did, right behind me to my right, oh man, it's giving me chills now. I heard a heavy step, and then one directly behind me, and then one to my left, and it just stopped. And it's almost as if something stood right behind me. And I mean, when I say behind me, I felt like I could almost reach back and touch it. That's how close it was.
Man.
Oh man. And I always say I'm not an Outback Jack. I could say I'm no Clint Eastwood. Hey, I was petrified. I couldn't motion to Chris. I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't talk. I couldn't yell and, "Hey, dude, there's something behind me." It is that feeling you have when you were a kid and you were leaving your basement. You turn off the basement light and you're going up the stairs and you have something coming up behind you.
Wiping at your butt. Yeah.
Yes, right. Well, it's it was that overwhelming feeling that it was still to my left. It never moved. I heard it come up, but it never moved. It just stood there. And I'm like, oh, and this is it. I'm thinking in my head, and this is it. I mean, I can't move. I can't do anything. And then somehow or another, I broke out of it and walked directly to Chris. And I already had my thermal in my hand at the time. That's the little unit I connected to my iPhone at the time. So I get to Chris, and Chris is still standing there, right? And I felt like I was petrified for at least, 20 minutes. That's what it felt like. And as soon as I walked to Chris, I turned around, and instead of shining a light, because I have more respect in the woods, I turned on my thermal to see what was standing there. And there's nothing there. Never heard it leave. And that really, really rattled me. And I think we hiked for, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes or an hour later. Then we just ended up heading back because the mosquitoes were getting bad. And after getting home and thinking about it and processing it, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing out here. That thing could have killed me. My kids could have been fatherless, my wife husbandless. And I don't know what I'm dealing with. And I literally hung up my backpack for over a month. I did not have any interest at all to go back out into the Kettle Moraine. I was done. I was like, that's it. I'm going to leave it for, the finding Bigfoot people on TV and let them find it. And I'll say, okay, well, I knew it, but I'm not going back out there. That was too dangerous. But once you talk about this, it's almost like therapy to where I was able to get back on the horse again. And, then I started getting that drawn feeling to coming back out. So,
wow.
Yeah, that was, oh man, it's a
reality check.
It was a reality check. And I felt like nobody else would do that. I was the only guy in the woods hiking doing this that got that petrified. And I can't stress enough, I was a tree. My feet could not move.
Yeah.
My hands could not move. I could see, but it was so dark I couldn't see in front of me. And whatever it was standing right there. And then really when it comes down to it, somebody said, Jay, you've always been talking about making contact, not just, photographing or video or whatever. You want to make contact. Maybe that was your chance, right? But, but you could see how I reacted. So I wasn't ready to make that next step. So maybe that had to happen for me to continue into what I do.
Yeah. You always have this idea in your head, like, okay, if this happens, I'm going to do this, but you don't know till it happens. And it always happens suddenly. It catches you off guard. And, it scares the crap out of you.
Well, people always say that all the time, just like, Jay, what are you going to do when you actually come face to face with it? I said, well, first I'm going to, drop to the forest floor and put my thumb in my mouth and call for my mom, and whether in a fetal position, because literally that would be probably quite frightening. However, I think the more you think about it, you're hoping that your training of learning to get to that point might help to subside that a little bit, of saying, okay, there you are. I don't know what I'm looking at right now. This is crazy, but this is, you know what I mean? So, I mean, who knows? But that's why I tell people, I go, you don't know. You tell people all the time that there were rocks thrown at you and, oh man, I would have just gotten in the woods and just ran towards wherever the rocks were coming from. And I'm like, you don't get that sense, Scott. You know that from being out there. You're just kind of like, we're human, we're puny, we don't understand.
We have so many stabbable points. Yes,
right. Exactly. Yeah, we're vulnerable.
Even if that was a human being stepping up behind you, your back was to that person, and that's effed up. Like that. Yeah. Who the hell is walking behind me right now? That who cares if it's a Bigfoot or not? That's scary.
But you're 100% right, and a lot of times that will come into the danger zone. Not using a Maverick plug there, but the danger zone of not knowing what that could be. Because you know what? There is bobcat out there. There are cougars, rogue cougars, a rogue bear. I mean, here or there, but you never see them. You do have coyotes, and believe me, they travel in a pack and they let you know. There is still a lot of natural nature danger. And like you said, well, what if you come across somebody who's on the lam and wants to take you out? That's even a bigger fear. So that's how come I never hike alone. And it's not because I'm fearful, but my wife said if I ever died in the kettle, she'd kill me. So I have to stay safety first, no matter what I do. If I go out, I have that person's back, they have mine. That's trust.
All of these stories were great, and we could probably keep going with more and more, but thanks for being on here, Jay. This was fun. Again, huge congrats on your documentary, Scott. And actually, maybe Jay, you should be the one to say, but how do our listeners watch your documentary?
Well, they can find my documentary. Actually, if they go to my website, jaybachochin.com, you'll be able to find a media section where they have my first documentary and second documentary. And that will take you either to a link for my first documentary to Amazon Prime. My second documentary will take you to Vimeo. For right now, if there is any announcement that it gets on another platform, Prime or other, I will definitely note that. I do update my website pretty much all the time, so whatever you see is pretty much current. And that's the way you'd be able to watch it. And of course, my website's got everything that we talked about, a lot of pictures, a lot of what I would call this is evidence,
Cool.
But
again, Jay, thanks so much. And of course, everybody listening, thank you for listening. And as I always say at the end of our podcast here, there are fantastic stories everywhere. If you hear of one or many, reach out, let us know, and you might be the next member of the Fantastic Story Society. Thanks, everybody.